This week I'm going to be working on this 1951 Panhead chopper. This thing was built for Born Free a few years ago by Small City Cycles, and then it was shipped out here to Australia, and my buddy down the Gold Coast now owns it. So this thing is basically due for a freshen up. You know, it's leaking oil out the base gaskets, the D-rings are leaking, the oil pump just dumps the whole oil bag into the sump, so it wet sumps really badly. And the wiring has some gremlins. So I'm going to go through this thing and we're going to get it back on the road ripping. Oil pissing out of this thing. Alright, so I got this old thing, this old jigger. I have it up on my little workbench here. This thing is obnoxiously low. It was an absolute pain. Every time I put it in my truck or put it on the bench, it is an absolute pain just because of how low it is. And because of this, it is a pig to ride too. You like sit on top of this thing. It's like this little bike. It's like a little post bike. Post bike in Australia is like this little 110cc motorbike they deliver mail with, and it's this tiny little thing, and it just feels so petite, super low, and yeah. Anyway, get into working on this thing. This thing has oil pissing out of just about every orifice, lifter blocks pissing out, base gaskets pissing out, D-rings pissing out. The sump is always full of fucking oil, and that is because the little ball in the pump here, so you've got your feed line here, so that has oil, you know, deadheaded all the time. There's oil sitting there. So when this little ball in here on your spring leaks into the sump and then fills your sump up. So when you start it, it'll piss oil out the breather. Really bad on Evos. Evos always do it. And that's what it is, that little ball in there. So I might have to come in here and seat this ball again. My buddy Ollie, he has this little tool that he made. And it's basically just like because it's just a seat with a ball. So the ball sits on a seat, and if that's not seated properly, the oil just gets past it. So he's got a little tool that is a rod that's welded to one of the balls. So you can put it in there and tap it with a hammer. Because that's aluminium, when you peen it, you give it a little hit, it'll knock the edge that it sits on flat again. So it gives it a better seal. So I might have to come through and do that on the pump. But for starters, I think we're just gonna knock these heads off, because we have to get into the base gaskets here. So we'll knock the heads off. Obviously we'll pull the seat off, tank off, exhaust off. Then we'll pop the push rods out, and then we can just undo the heads and pop them out, because you can't get your pans off your heads in the frame, but you can get the heads off the barrels in the frame. So we've got to take this head off in one unit. So I'm going to go through, start pulling this thing apart, and when we've got it all apart, we'll have a look and see what we're dealing with. Alright, so I have most of this top end apart now. I have all the brace off, all the push rods out. Yes, you could have left them in and undone the heads and got them all out at once, but you would have to undo the push rods at some point anyway. Might as well do it now. So basically I'm ready to take these heads off, but I was just looking around after I've gotten rid of a few things. You might think that, you know, I'm going to give this bike a good clean before I bring it in here. I'm going to wipe, get all the dirt off it, all the oil and everything off it, but the oil and the dirt sort of gives you a telltale of where it's leaking from. So if you come a bit closer, I can show you around here what I mean by that. So if we come in here, right in on the lifter blocks where I said it was leaking, you can see down here, see where all the dirt's collected, where all the oil's sitting. So I know that it's leaking up here somewhere around the lifter blocks here. And also around the other side is a really good telltale how I knew that these base gaskets were leaking. See how down here, all this dirt is built up here and there's oil around the timing plug hole. See there's dirt around here? That tells me that stuff's weeping. So the dirt and oil, before you wash this thing, have a good look around and sort of see where the oil's coming from, and then you know what you need to fix. So basically now that we have all this shit off, now comes the daunting task of taking off all the head bolts. There is 2, 4, 5 head bolts, and they're sometimes in really annoying spots. So I'm going to go around one head at a time, pop these heads off, and then we can have a look inside here and see what we're working with. Righto, so that's all the bolts. Let's see if we can sneak this thing out. Oh, piss it in. Absolutely piss it in. Nothing too major I can see straight away. Oh, the gasket wasn't lined up very well. That doesn't help. Show you what I mean by that in a sec. See how this head gasket, see this is your oil feed for your head. See how the coal's half covered? So that'd be like half the volume it should be getting. So these all early pans up to 65 of oil through the barrels, and then 65 is called the outside oiler, and that's where the oil comes up from here and then it oils in the side of the head. So that is your oil feed, that is your oil return. So whenever you do your head gaskets, line these up as best as possible. Don't worry about these holes lining up, worry about these two lining up. Alright, so all the bolts out of the front head now. Give that a little knock. That looks pretty good. The, looks like the, oh no, it looks alright. The feed hole's definitely better than the other side, so that looks pretty good. Just use these shitty little blue gaskets, which I'm not a huge fan of, but looks pretty good. Righto, so now that we've got our heads off here, we want to go through and take our barrels off. So what you really want to do with this, you want to have both pistons sort of at the bottom of its stroke, so you don't have to lift these jugs off as far, because if your piston's right at the top, you won't get the jugs off the whole way without hitting the frame. So we're just going to push this over. Fuck, that sounds good. That inner primary is banging big time, so I'm going to have a look at that, but we'll just put these pistons all the way to the bottom, so both of them are all the way to the bottom. So now let's start undoing all these bolts. Alright, so I got all the nuts out around this rear cylinder. Sometimes you just got to give them a knock like that. Oh, that looks like it's fucking got water in it. So we're just going to get this past the rings. Nice and gentle. Jeez, look at the corrosion around the base of the studs there. So just have a look at the skirts of the piston, they look pretty good. Alright, so same with front cylinder, give this guy a knock. This one looks like it's been glued in, there's like glue around the base gasket, so that's not ideal. Same thing, let's have a look at these pistons, We'll just give this a move. Roll this around. So you want to look on your skirts for any wear. These ones look good. No wear on the skirts. The rings still have plenty of compression. You'll know when this thing's been super hot because these rings don't have that spring in them anymore. And that's when you replace the rings. But all these rings still have heaps of spring in them. So I think they're all right, so I'll probably reuse them. But basically we just need to go through here and clean all this base gasket up because obviously I want to replace all these base gaskets. Probably don't have to take any of these rings out of these pistons or nothing because it wasn't smoking or anything, it was just leaking heaps of oil. So I'm going to go through, clean up all of this crap, and then I'm going to go over to the barrels, I reckon, and we're going to give them a quick hone before we put it back together. Alright, so I just wanted to show you what I was talking about when we spoke about wet sumping. See the shiny oil in there? So that means our cases are pretty well full of oil. So all the oil out of the oil bag has gone down, seeped past the oil pump and filled up the cases here. So that is why we have all this oil pissing out of it. So there's definitely a seat issue in our oil pump here. The other thing I noticed while off camera, when you pull this stuff apart, you want to go through and check there is no up and down movement in your rods. Make sure you don't have excessive side to side movement. Like there needs to be a little bit, but make sure there's not heaps. And the last thing you want to check is make sure the pistons don't move on the con rods. Now this might be a bit tricky for you to see, but this piston actually has slop. So I'm rocking that back and forth. And you can see how easy the thing moves back and forth on the rod. So the pin is flogged out on both these. That one's a bit worse. You can sort of just hear it there. So both the pins are flogged out in the con rods here. So I'm gonna have to dig a bit further and pop these pistons off and do some measuring in there and see what's going on. All right, so I have both heads here just on the bench. When you got these things off, you might as well do a little bit of an overhaul, just like check your valve seats, check a few bits and pieces. A good little trick you can do, you can just fill this full of fuel, and then if it leaks past the valves or something, you know you've got an issue. So this little cavity here should hold fuel. So I've just had a quick little look over these things, and I have noticed something that I do not like. So I noticed on the rear cylinder here, if you look inside the head, you see the valve seat coming through there. You see how it's missing the aluminium off the top of the seat there. So that tells me that this thing might have been like buffed out or bored out, you know, just to make it a bit faster boy, but you can see how thin the aluminium is on top of the seat there. Or maybe the seat's gone deeper or something weird's happened there, but if that keeps going, it's going to lose the seat. So if it drops the seat while the engine's running, it's going to hold the valve open and it's going to run the valve into the piston. So this is something I'm going to have to fix. So I'm going to quickly pop both these heads apart. I'm going to take the rockers off, and then we're going to have a look at these things a bit further once all this is apart. Now these heads are pretty sweet. They look really nice. There's fuck all play in our little rockets here. They even have this little oil control guy here. So the idea of this guy is when there's oil splashing around in here, catches it here and then delivers it to your guide here, because this is front cylinder. So that guy's up like that. So this guy, the exhaust will get heaps of oil, but up the top here, the intake gets fuck all. So this guy catches it and then directs it onto the top of our valve there. So this all looks pretty good in here. So let's go over to the rear head and get through that. So cool, this guy also has the cool little oil control guy. Super close there, but another thing you can check on these rockers is your foot here. You want to make sure this guy is still an arc. So the idea of this thing is pushing the valve up and down, right? And this foot is dragging on the top of the valve there. So if that has a little shoulder in it or a sharp point in it, that will make the top end make noise because it's sort of jumping over a ridge. So all these look nice. These ones look good too. So I had to make a little jig a while ago to grind these things. It's in one of my earlier videos if you want to go have a look. I think it was Ben's Panhead rebuild. So you want to have a look at how to grind these guys, go back to that video. So basically these look all good. I'm going to keep these Ds separate. So we have a front cylinder and a rear cylinder. So everything will go back into the same spot. So let's take these rockers off and then have a chat about what we're going to do with these heads. So when we got these off, you can pop these guys apart and have a look inside. So all our shaft looks pretty good here. You pop this spot apart, have a look at our runners here. They look all nice. No galls up, no nothing. So let's put that back together. Call that Good. So let's do the next one. Alright, let's have a look at our intake rocker. So that all looks pretty nice. Let's pull this apart, same as the other one. Sometimes these are really stubborn to get apart. Now you don't want to be prying these things apart with a screwdriver or something. Usually you can just grab the rocker and just give it a bit of a tug, just like that. Usually when they're stuck nicely together, you know, they're a good fit and they're going to be nice. But this thing looks all very nice. Put that back together. So put him on that side. So that is our rear head, sorry, and now let's do the front head. So basically the repair on this rear cylinder, isn't it? So the repair on this rear cylinder is sort of a bit tricky because you have to take out the guide and then you have to weld that up and then you got to put a guide back in it. So I don't exactly have the tooling to go ahead and take out a guide and put a new one in, and then you got to seat the valve and everything to the new the new valve seat. You've got to seat it all again, you got to put a new one in and machine it. I don't have the machinery to do that, so I'm going to give this to a head shop. I might end up welding this up for them, we'll see what they say, but I'm just going to give this to a machine shop to fix up. I think I'm going to give them both heads so that they can just do a valve job on both heads while they're off, because obviously this head's going to get one. Might as well do the same to this one. It might only just be a quick touch up. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take out all of these studs now, because sometimes they put these in a jig to deck the heads and you just put it flat on these guys. So I'm going to take out all the studs and then get this to my local valve shop. Alright, so while the heads are away, I've dropped them off to get that valve seat sorted out. We need to address this issue of the wrist pins being flogged out. So how we're going to do that is with this little tool my good buddy Ollie lent me. So this thing is a little tool that will bolt to the case so that we can ream the new wrist pin bushes in the engine without having to take the rods out. So before we can do any of this, I need to take these pistons off the rods and have a look at them. So I'll go through and quickly do that. Alright, so I have the pistons off here. I've just given them a quick clean. I just buffed the domes. Don't buff your skirts. You can buff the domes, but nothing else. So giving them a big clean up. I've got the rings off here. They all look pretty freaking nice. So over here, whenever you have your barrels off, always stuff some rags in your cases like this, because if you drop something in there, the chances of fishing it out are slim to none. So if that happens to you, you got to pull these cases apart and fish it out. So always have them jammed in there like that. And now that I have the pistons off and just have the pins in here, it's a bit easier to see why we are doing this. So hopefully you can see that. See that little knock it's got back and forth in there? So this pin is super loose in that bush. Front cylinder is worse than the rear. The rear is not terrible, but it is definitely not ideal. So if I'm doing that one, I might as well do that one. So basically what we're replacing is in here, there is a little brass bush and we're gonna replace that. So I have replacements here. This is what we are replacing. So what I'm gonna do, I have a little tool that presses out the bush that's already in the arm, and then we will press these bushes in there. So let's do that now. All right, so now we want to take the bushes out of our conrods here. So the way we're going to do that is with this little Jim's tool that I have here. Once again, Ollie lent me this, otherwise I was just going to make something. This is a pretty simple piece. You could either easily machine something up. Probably want to do a bit better than a few washes, but you know, you could definitely machine this up if you had to. So basically this guy just goes on here like this, and this pushes out the little bush that's already in there. So I'm going to put this together, and then we're going to tighten it up. And then this big cup here is so that the bush can go inside this when we're pushing this little punch type deal in there. So this guy has like a nice little recess that goes straight into the bush like that. And then this guy all tightens together, and then that pushes the bush out. But I'm just going to get a quick Instagram post here. If you don't follow me, this is a good plug. You should jump over there and give me a follow. Anyway, so we're just going to get our spanners like this. Yep, that guy there. Hope you guys can see me big fat fingers. And then we're just going to tighten this up. The first bit's always the hardest to get it started. And then that's it. We're just going to keep doing this. You Americans would probably have a rattle gun on this by now, but you want to do this by hand so you don't fuck anything. Alright, so let's pull this thing apart now and have a look at the bush we've just pressed out. So take the nut off, then a little washer, a little pusher, take this apart, and then in here, there's our bush. So now we're going to come through and press bushes back into these. Alright, so now we're going to do the complete opposite. So this is our new wrist pin bush here. I've just cleaned it off because sometimes these things have like a wax film on them when you get them, especially steel parts. So you want to get that off because this thing's got to be nice and slippery. So we want to oil this thing up when we put it in. The interference fit is what's holding it in there, not, you know, the friction from not having any oil. So we want to oil that up so it slides nicely in there. Oiled that up. So same tool, we just got to turn around this bit. So this is a nice Jim's tool that Ollie had. But as I said, you could always, you know, make one of these if you really had to. If you only had one engine to do your own, you just make one of these instead of buying it. Basically, you use it on this part because then the bush sits on that shoulder and then pushes with the shoulder. So putting this in is a little bit harder than taking the old one out. And I know this because I've already done this one. So I don't want you guys to watch me fail on the first one. No, the first one wasn't a fail, but I've definitely got the hang of it. So the only other thing you gotta worry about is lining up this little hole. So it's got a hole in here and that's for oil to oil your pin. So you're gonna make sure that's lined up because you want oil to get to your hole. So, like I said, this one's a bit more difficult because this has all got to be all perfectly straight, and this has got to be lined up. So, somewhere there, and then let's just put a little bit of pressure on this. So you might get a bit of material shave off when you're pushing this in. That's not the end of the world. You just want to make sure that it is even around the whole thing. Like if you're pushing off a heap of material on the top and nothing on the bottom, you know it's going in on the piss. So you just want to make sure that you're going in nice and even. I just sort of put a bit of pressure on it, give this a bit of a knock, just to make sure she's going in straight. Give it a little bit more. Looks pretty good. I don't see any shavings coming off yet. So let's just give this thing a little bit of help. Alright, so I've got a little bit of shavings coming off here, so I'll just give that a knock that way. But other than that, we are going in super nice here. So basically, this one's got a shoulder on it, so all you do is you just push this in all the way till it seats up on the shoulder, and then she's home. That little groove will line up, everything will line up.
A few moments later.
So there you have it. That is a new bush pressed into your rod. So that's come out super nice. So I can put this tool away, and then I'm going to come over here and set up the next tool we're going to have to use to ream this to size, because this guy is undersized. Our pin won't fit in here yet. So just for show, this is our pin. It's nowhere near fitting. So we've got to ream this to size so it's a perfect fit. Alright, so now we have both these wrist pins in here. I need to ream them to size. So there is a little tool for that. So once again, my buddy Ollie lent me this tool that he's got, and this is a wrist pin bush ream. So basically what this thing does, this guy here is just a little device that goes over the rod like that. And this thing here is what lines up the ream so that you ream your rod perfectly straight and horizontal. So I'm going to go through, I'll bolt this thing on in the right place, and then we'll come back and have a look at reaming this thing. Right, so basically how this little guy here works, he bolts to your base gasket bolts just like that, and then you rotate your crank so that the rod pin lines up with this guy, the ream, and then the ream has three steps, sorry. So it has this first step, and that's designed to just slip the end into the rod, and then that lines up all of this so that you can bolt it down. And then we have little Allen keys here that hold the rod like that in the right position, so when you ream it, it doesn't move. Is that the right one? Nope. So that goes through like that, and then if I get this ream back out. So like I said, the first step lines it up, and then the second step is for all your pre-Evo wrist pins, and then if you just put the ream the whole way through, that is Evo size. But the funny thing about these pistons, these are some Keith Black pistons. I've realized that the wrist pins are actually Evo size. I'm not sure why, apparently that's just some stuff that he used to do. So these pins are actually Evo size. So I've got to put this ream the whole way through to size our new wrist pins for Evo size. So this takes a little while, so I'm going to set the camera up here, and then we're going to go through and slowly ream these things. So once again, when we ream this stuff, we just want to put some oil on it or some cutting fluid or something just so that it's not dry and binding up. So plenty of oil in that guy. This ream has done a lot of work, so it's not as sharp as it should be, but basically all you do is you just do this. You can hear it cutting. So that is the ream cutting. And all we're going to do is just going to keep going the same direction until this reams the whole way through. And then that should be the correct size for our pins. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to ream this now, and then we're going to come back when I got this thing to size, and I can show you what sort of fit we want. Alright, so after a little bit of fiddling around, I'll show you this reamer went nice and loose in here. So we've got this pin to the right size. So here is my little pin. Just in, no movement. That's what you want. Moves easily, but there's no movement. So this guy is done. So I already practiced on the rear one, so this is also done. So I don't have to worry about that. See that? Nice. Moves easily, but there's no movement. So I'm happy with these two. Now we can sort of put our pistons back on. I've ordered some base gaskets and stuff for this, so we can start putting it together. But while I'm waiting on those gaskets, we can go and get the barrels ready. I want to give them a quick hone and then paint them again so they look nice and new. So this is our before and after barrel comparison. So I've just given this thing a quick hone. As you just saw, you can see the glaze on the bore beforehand. That's what we're trying to get rid of. We want this dull finish. It's like a rougher finish than this glossy finish here. That makes the ring seal a bit better and all that sort of jazz. So you don't want this glossy glazed barrel here. Alright, so if you're trying to clean up your old stubborn head gasket like I am on this barrel here, a little trick that I use to do this, I just get like a bit of emery paper. This is like a 240 or something. You don't want any coarser than that because you'll start putting grooves and stuff in your head gasket, area. So all you do, you just whack that on the back of a humble old file like that. And then you've got a flat surface. So as long as you push down on this file, you're going to get a flat sand because you don't want to be putting edges on your head gasket mating surface. So if you go around like that, you see all the head gasket material comes off. So if you were to just do this, just for instance, with your fingers like this, you're going to get a rounded edge on everything. You're going to get more in some spots than others. It's just going to be shit. So get yourself a little file like that, just push down straight on it and you'll get a nice flat sand. See that? The stuff comes off super even and leaves a beautiful surface there. So I'll go through and do this whole thing now. Alright, so I have both my barrels here. I've got both the head gasket mating surfaces, both nice, and I've got them both super clean with some thinners. And as you can see on this one, I have it taped up. And now that is because we're going to come through and give these things a little paint. Now to get this nice, even tape job around the head gasket mating surface, we don't use a razor or anything. So I'm going to show you a quick little trick for that. So we're just going to quickly put our tape on here, making sure that we are sticking it really nice to the head gasket surface. Overlap them nicely. Get in there nicely. Don't worry about the center too much because we're just trying to keep the paint out of the bore, really. It's not very crucial. So we're just going to go around quickly, do this. Now, a lot of people give me slack because I have a go at people for painting their engines. Now, this is different because this is steel. This is going to rust. I'm just sick of people painting their aluminium cases. Painting something that doesn't actually rust. I don't get it. You guys have got rocks in your heads. Cut it out. It's fucking stupid. Anyway, so we're going to go around here. Make sure the tape is super stuck to the head gasket surface, just like that. Next, we're going to get our trusty little hammer here. Get it on your little ball point here, and you're just going to go around the edge and give it a slight tap, just like this. Now, we're not trying to drive home a 4-inch nail here. We're just trying to break the edge of the tape around, the little surface here. Just a heap of light little taps is all we need. Alright, so when you've tapped it the whole way around, this part is pretty satisfying. We're just going to pull it off just like that. It's almost as satisfying as pulling yourself off. Almost. Get that little bit. So there you have it. that is, you know, both of our barrels now ready to give a quick lick of paint. Now you're doing a top end on this thing anyway, so you might as well clean these things up and get them looking super nice. Alright, so I have, you know, painted all my barrels now. I've got this thing all cleaned up. All my surfaces for my base gaskets and barrels are super clean now. In the meantime, I also replaced my lifter block gaskets underneath these because I bought a top end gasket kit. It came with these. As we saw at the start of the video, we saw some oil leaks down this side, so I'm pretty sure the base gaskets were leaking on these guys, so I've replaced them too. So basically the next step on this thing is to whack our barrels back on. So what I want to do, I want to get the piston rings back on these things just like that. And then I want to go ahead and I'm just going to rotate this a little bit just to make is a bit easier to put these barrels on. So just like that, and we want to go ahead and I'm just going to do one at a time. So let's start with the rear cylinder first. So I'm just going to go through, whack the base gasket on there. So the base gaskets I've got for this are a steel chromatic gasket. Now, if you were putting this engine together with just the normal paper gaskets you get, I would be putting some, you know, some goop on them just to stop them from leaking, because these are obviously the most annoying gaskets to replace because you've got to take the whole top end off. So when I say goop, I just mean some like gasket maker, like just put a nice film over this if they were the paper style. But these chromatic ones have a coating on them already. Like I can stick my fingernail into it, like it's a thick coating. So I'm just going to put this guy on nice and dry so that that coating does its job. I feel like if I put gasket maker on this, it'll just ruin the coating and not work properly. So go through, let's whack this guy on. Always remember your oil holes line up. So this is your oil feed and this is your oil return. If they don't line up, your engine's not going to get feed of oil or return any of the oil. So very crucial that they line up. That's it there. So that's him. So our oil hole lines up. That's sweet. Doesn't line up amazingly, but it lines up nonetheless. And then I'm going to get the barrel now and we can start looking at putting that on. Alright, so before we put our barrel on, we just want to double check some stuff. So see this here, this is our piston ring direction. So these are the directions that we want the gaps for our piston rings to be facing. So it's just basically putting them evenly spaced apart, because if they all lined up, you just push compression through the whole lot. So we just want to make sure that is correct. They're all facing different ways, like that guy there, and then our two are here, so that's right. So the next thing I want to do, I just want to put some oil on this thing so that when we put it together, we don't scratch anything. But I also don't want to get the oil on the gasket we just put on there. So I'm just going to get my trusty little oil here. Just going to spray a bit on there. Doesn't need to be too crazy because we're going to burn all this off again when we start this thing. So I just want a bit of oil on there like that. Move him around. So that's cool. And then we want to do the same thing with our barrels. So we want to get our barrels here and we just want to put a light bit of oil in these as well. like I said, you put heaps in it, it's just gonna burn off heaps. So we just want a little bit in there. Just get it all around like that. Sweet. So the next part gets a little bit tricky because usually this helps if you've got another hand, but because I'm by myself, I'm gonna be doing this by myself. So basically what we're gonna do, we're just gonna put the jug over it like that, and you see where the piston rings obviously need to be compressed. I'm just gonna use my trusty little screwdriver here and then just slowly poke the rings in around, just like that. See, that goes one. So then we want to poke the next one in. Like usually people use like a paddle pop stick, like a little wooden stick or something is pretty good because then you don't scratch anything. But as long as you are nice and gentle with it, you won't have an issue. So there's that. So you just keep going around and pushing your gasket in, your rings in, sorry. Just want to make sure you don't have heaps of pressure on it because then your rings won't like to go in. So this can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Alright, so that is the two compression rings. Now generally you can just slowly give this a bit of a rock back and forth and then get your oil rings in that way. Sometimes they need a bit of help, but I think that's got it. So that's it. So now before we get too much further, just make sure our base gaskets are clean, which they are. So now we just hit that down. Make sure you got this round the right way, like I don't. Give him the spin. Just like that. So there is one of our pistons in there. So I'm going to go through, I'll do exactly the same on the front cylinder, use exactly the same process as we just did, and then we'll come back and talk these things down. Alright, so that is the front jug put on now. So what I did when I put this thing on, I just used my kicker and I turned this thing over so that the pistons are coming up, and then I just took my rag and I just wiped out all the excess oil out of this thing. So if you go back to the bottom with the pistons, you can see the oil in the bores. What I like to do is just wipe that oil out because whatever oil's in here, it's gonna have to burn off anyway. So instead of, you know, sooting up your plugs and filling your exhaust full of oil and stuff, just wipe it out of here because it doesn't need it. It's just gonna burn it off anyway. So the other thing I went through and did, I just put all these nuts on the base of the cylinders here. So I just went around and I'm just slowly nipping them up. The torque on these things is like 36 foot-pound or something, but a real person doesn't worry about that. We're just gonna go nice and firm on them all. We're gonna go round. We're not just gonna go, you know, straight off the bat and go real tight on one and the rest are loose. Slowly make your way around them, tighten them down until they're all nice and tight. So basically this is sort of all I can do with this engine at this point because I'm still waiting on the heads to come back. So the heads are still getting that valve seat repair done. So this is probably going to be it for this episode. The next episode I'll be obviously putting the heads on and then I'll be completely fitting this thing out and getting it ready to run, and then I need to do wiring on this bike as well. So I'm going to do a full cloth wire wiring on this bike too. So there'll probably be 2 more episodes on this bike, finishing off this top end and then wiring it up. So thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you on the next one.